Hello and welcome to the 1980s. MTV has just launched, the internet is becoming mainstream, people have started playing Pac-Man, Michael Jackson is really popular, and Ronald Reagan has just been elected the 40th President of the United States of America. And unlike his predecessor Jimmy Carter, he wants to accelerate the arms race with the Soviet Union and make America great again. Now, what was the arms race? Well, good thing you asked. The arms race was a consequence of the Cold War. Now, what was the Cold War? Another question. Well, you see, the USA and the USSR were the strongest powers of the time, but both the countries had a different economic system. Now, to see which one was better, they decided to spy on each other, make bombs with world-ending capacity, and am I forgetting something? Oh yeah, make little countries fight each other. They did that a lot. Now let's come back to President Reagan. You see, Ronald Reagan was a member of the Republican Party, and what the Republican Party wanted at that time was a victory of the United States of glorious America. So they elected President Reagan, and Reagan implemented the Reagan Doctrine, and through the Reagan Doctrine, the United States started funding anything which hated communism. And anything really means anything. Human who hates communism, take money. Political leader who hates communism, take money. Country who hates communism, take money. Afghan freedom fighter who hates communism, take money. Dog who hates communism, take money. Tree who hates communism, take money. Everybody gets money. Sorry to interrupt, but we're out of money. Well, shut up, because 1, nobody cares, and 2, nobody cares, so go away, Bob. Oh wait, we're out of money. Oh shit. The recession of 1980 could have been a lot worse if not for President Reagan, because boy was that man always 2 steps ahead. Reagan implemented his economic ideology known as Reaganomics. Reaganomics basically allowed a more restriction-less market by lowering taxes for rich people and businesses. And Reagan hoped that they'll use this extra money to make more jobs and help the economy grow. Now let's talk about the Bolsheviks or the USSR. You see, after the Stalin guy died, the Soviet economy started stagnating, slowly but surely, and it reached a very critical stage in the 1980s. Leonid Brezhnev was the 4th leader of the USSR, and this man's only goal in life was to win the arms race. So he ignored the development of infrastructure needs of the minorities and basically everything a government is supposed to do, and decided to increase military spending and start a whole new race called the space race. Nobody took my man Leonid seriously, just like me. So he died. I'm alive though. Then the other guy who came in also died, and then the other guy who came in also died, and then the other guy. Worst of all was that the USSR wasn't just experiencing political instability, they were also experiencing economic instability. You see, the US recession of 1980 reduced global oil demand, and the Soviet economy at that time heavily relied on oil exports. Now look at this graph. As soon as Reagan is elected, defense budget reaches an all-time high thanks to the Reagan Doctrine. But what's interesting is, even after a recession and basically a failed economy, the USSR still kept investing in their defense. And I think even a 5-year-old knows that when you don't have money, you try to save it. Unfortunately, the Soviet Union was only 4 years old, mentally. Cringe. By the 1980s, communism was something you would make fun of, because the USSR was the staple of communism and all they had to show for it was satellite nations. But Ronald Reagan's Reagan Doctrine took that away from them as well. Now, satellite nations were basically independent countries but under heavy economic/military/political influence of either the Soviet Union or the Americans. Now, because they couldn't directly go to war because, you know, atom bombs, they made little countries go to war against each other, trying to spread their own ideology. And this was the only thing in the 1980s which the Soviets were still proud of. But Ronald Reagan destroyed that, as remarked by Charles Krauthammer.
In that State of the Union that the President announced a policy which he said support for freedom fighters on every continent, from Afghanistan to Nicaragua.
And we must not break faith with those who are risking their lives on every continent from Afghanistan to Nicaragua.
By which he meant support of anti-communist guerrillas, particularly in Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Kampuchea, and Angola. It's not just a random series of policies supporting an insurgency here and an insurgency there. I think it amounts to a very significant shift in our history of containment. It's a new way to contain the Soviet Union. It's containment aimed at the latest acquisitions of the Soviet Empire.
In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the General Secretary of the USSR, and this man's only goal was to implement reform. So he adopted the policy of glasnost and perestroika, which basically meant I'll start giving a shit about the people in my country. So began the age of reforms. Independence was being given to the Eastern Bloc states, revolutions were no longer being suppressed, people were allowed to criticize the government, and most importantly, peace talks were on. So Reagan and Gorbachev met for the first time in the Geneva Summit of 1985. So you want me to sign 41 cultural agreement and also reiterate the stance of the USSR to end the Soviet-Afghan war? Yeah. So what do you give me for return gift, comrade? I have something amazing to offer you. Colonial Williamsburg Chippendale style mahogany box and a desk set with fountain pens. Oh my god, Reagan. That is exactly what I wanted. Now come here, let me give you a kiss. And then on December 8th, 1987, something huge happened.
Today, I, for the United States, the General Secretary for the Soviet Union, have signed the first agreement ever to eliminate an entire class of U.S. and Soviet nuclear weapons. We have made history.
The INF Treaty was the first ever time Reagan implemented a policy focusing on the idea of détente, which is a French term which refers to relaxation. Because Reagan's policies were unique. Unlike his predecessors Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford or Richard Nixon, he didn't just focus on détente and peace and all. He also focused on offensive strategies. He built up a strong army, he made efforts to exploit the Soviet economy, he toppled governments, and most importantly, contained and reversed the expansion of the Soviet Empire. He wanted to show the world that capitalism was the better ideology. And of course, there were multiple other factors which played a part in the disintegration of the USSR, and Reagan was only a tiny dot. We cannot overlook his contributions. His foreign policies were executed at the right time and with the right intent, which is why they succeeded to push the Soviet Union into the pit of doom. Eventually, the USSR dissolved in 1991 and Boris Yeltsin took control over Russia. For the Central Asian states of the USSR, they made the Commonwealth of Independent States, and legally it is the successor of the Soviet Union. So maybe the USSR does still exist.